Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. These are some additional thoughts on former President Trump's conviction. I had time to reflect on it some more, and I was hesitant, to be honest with you, to bring these things up before. But after reflection and, to be honest, meditation, I decided to go ahead and share these thoughts with anybody out there who might be listening. These are different than what I said before. Um, I'm going to be taking the conviction of President Trump, former President Trump, and possible future President Trump in a different direction. And this has been something which has concerned me for some time, and not only me. A lot of people have expressed concern about the thing that I will be discussing right now, and that is the possibility of right-wing violence. As you may know, the FBI has for a long time been tremendously concerned about right-wing violence, far right-wing violence. For example, sovereign citizens. And I will not go into that right now. If you want to find out what it is, you can Google it. But they are, just to be simple, far right-wing libertarians who believe in a fallacy. They are not only in the United States, they are in Europe, they are in South Africa, they are in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere. But that is only one part of it. We have seen this far right-wing violence reflected in the insurrection, the 1/6 insurrection by the Make America Great Again movement, the MAGA movement, after President Trump lost the election and did not concede. And that resulted in many of his fans and supporters going to the Capitol building, and for the first time in American history, successfully invading that building with a version of the Confederate flag, not the actual Confederate flag that was used by the Confederacy, but nonetheless, a flag that represented the Confederacy. And they got in there and they frightened a lot of people. Many of them were arrested and convicted. Fortunately, only one person was killed. And I feel kind of guilty about saying fortunately, because one person being killed is still a loss of a human life. And I am not happy to see that person lose her life. But it could have been worse. It could have been much worse than it actually was. The issue to me relates to that MAGA movement. Now, the MAGA movement is much smaller than it was back during the 1/6 insurrection, much smaller. We have seen that reflected in President Trump's rallies, which have had relatively low attendance. President Trump himself seems to have some degree of cognitive impairment, as does President Joe Biden. And that perhaps is one reason for it. But also, as a sociologist, I can say that social movements usually have a lifespan. That means they have a beginning, a duration, and an end. There is always an end to every social movement. The civil rights movement, which I remember and was a part of, ended. The women's liberation movement, which I was also a part of peripherally, also ended. That does not mean that feminism ended, and that does not mean that the quest for civil rights for people of color ended, but those actual movements ended. And that has been the case with every major social movement that we have seen, not only in the US, but all over the world. So that is perhaps a sign of hope that we may not see any political violence. And my objective is not to stir up fear. And that is the reason why I did not want to bring this up in my previous podcast, because I wasn't really sure how to say what I'm saying now without fear mongering. And that is the last thing I want to do. I am not a fear monger by disposition. I try to comfort people. I have always been a comforter, not a fear monger. I don't care who the person is. When I was still a working professor, I had students who I did not agree with in most ways, but when they had problems, I would invite them to come into my office, which some did and some didn't, and talk with me. And I would talk with them. And as a practicing phenomenologist, which is a part of my critical realism, I would set aside my negative views, perhaps in some cases, of their particular points of view, and I would simply look at them and speak to their minds, their hearts, and their souls. So that is basically my approach to dealing with anyone. And I hope that that is what we see happening. But given the fact that we are a very divided country here in the US, and the US is not alone, but perhaps the US is exceptionally divided. I'll put it that way. We are politically divided, and we are religiously divided, and we are divided along many other demographic dimensions as well. And so, but here we are talking about primarily political divisions, and I guess to some extent cultural divisions as well. My concern still is that there may be enough people, not that the MAGA movement is still as vigorous as it was during the insurrection, or as it was during President Trump's administration, or during his campaign for the nomination and eventually for the presidency. But it doesn't take that many people to cause a hailstorm. It doesn't. And without trying to stir up fear, which I am not intending to do, because I cannot predict the future. I have no way of knowing. But when you look at this event, the conviction of a former president of the United States, the first time that it has happened in American history, and we are only at the beginning of this process. I would say that it is fair to expect that the social, societal implications of President Trump's convictions will go on for many years, maybe decades. I would assume for the rest of my life, but I am an old man at 68, so my life may not be that much longer, who knows? But I would think even beyond my life, given how divided we are politically, and inevitably, there are going to be some people who are going to be very, very angry at what just happened. And again, it only takes one person It only takes one person to commit an act of terrorism. Look at what happened on 9/11 and how devastating that was for the United States, bringing us into a war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and of course, the more generic war on terror. That was started by basically 19 people, not very many people, not that many people who were on those three planes. Of course, one crashed in Pennsylvania, the others reached their destinations. But regardless, I think, again, that we need to watch the news. That's what I would say. Do not engage in fear mongering. Do not try to frighten other people. If you see somebody that you know who is engaging in fear mongering, my suggestion is to quietly bring them off to the side and in a calm voice, perhaps say to them some of the things that I am saying right now. In other words, that what you are saying is not very helpful. We in the United States, from a Maoist third worldist perspective, are not ready for revolution. I think that should be evident considering the growth of the far right in the US and the fact that we virtually have no organized left in the US at all. The last time we had an organized left was with the Black Panthers. That was the end of the New Left, the so-called New Communist Movement. Since that time, the left has been basically dead. So the chances that we will have revolutions here in the US right now is, I think, very, very remote. It could happen. No one can predict the future. But is there sufficient dialectical or revolutionary potential for revolutions? I would say no. I hope that there will be in the third world and the fourth world when the time comes. In many ways, borrowing from so-called dependency theory, the third and fourth world functions as a kind of proletariat to the bourgeois first world. They are dependent upon the first world and have been for generations. Once they come out of that dependency, they will hopefully become aware of their actual power, their ability to change things, to make the world better. But again, that time has not arrived either. We are still living in the darkness of the capitalist world system. So, because we have never seen something like this happen, because this is an unprecedented event in American history, a once in a lifetime, possibly, event, although it's hard to say that, but I would assume a once in a lifetime event. Maybe I would hope that, but one can never be sure, and perhaps maybe the dialectic will bring other things to us that we have no way of knowing right now. So I should not really even try to tackle that particular issue. But certainly what just happened, the conviction of a former president, the ramifications of those convictions are going to be with us for a long, long time. What those ramifications are, I don't know. There are things floating around inside my head, but I will leave them in my head. I do not want to speculate. There is no point in doing that. There is enough speculation taking place already, whether in the news media or on YouTube. I do not want to contribute to that. I don't need to. If you want to read that speculation or listen to that speculation, that is your own business. But I do not want to be a voice crying out from the wilderness of ignorance, because that is where we all lie. We are in the wilderness of ignorance. We do not know what will happen. But again, because of the stunning nature of what just happened, and because I suspect that the convictions that just occurred in this trial may at least open the door to jurors considering, not to say that they will do it, but considering the possibility of convicting Trump in future trials. That will simply multiply the effects. There are a lot of people who are in love with President Trump, and it is not my business to tell them not to be in love with him. If they want to be in love with him, that is their right to do that. But my concern is not what they feel. My concern is what they do. My concern is not with whether people have a loyalty to a particular individual. I have loyalty to certain people as well. But I am not going to go out onto the street and commit violent acts, because I know that, first of all, they will not do any good. Because, again, there is not sufficient dialectical or revolutionary potential in the US. In addition, I'm an old man with osteoporosis. I don't know what I personally can do anyway. But regardless, there are people who are young. And I remember how I was when I was young. I was much more inclined to engage in, let me say, revolutionary activity, put it that way, even though I knew that that probably would not happen, and I was right, but I was inclined in that direction. I was willing to take chances when I was younger. Young people, in general, are willing to take chances. As people get older, they become more cautious. And so it is understandable when you look back at that MAGA insurrection on the Capitol, that 1/6 insurrection, if you go back and watch some of the videos on YouTube of that insurrection, the vast majority of people who were there ranged from their teens to their 30s. The older you get, and there were some older people in the insurrection, but not that many, because people become more careful. People become less willing to take risks. And so, again, that is my concern. I did not want to bring that up, as I said, my first time around, commenting on what happened. So I wanted to give it further thought as to how I would say it, and that's basically what I wanted to say. So again, be aware of it. Do not listen to the doomsayers. Do not listen to the fear-mongers. I am intentionally trying not to be a doomsayer or a fear-mongerer. All I am doing, hopefully, is to suggest that people be aware that, again, this is the first time in American history that we have seen the conviction of a former president of the US and an individual who was immensely popular, especially among members of his own party, especially among members of Congress who have seemed willing to bend over backwards for almost everything he has said. Now, whether they will be willing to do that should Trump, now a convicted felon, becomes president in the future is anyone's guess, but they might be. So we may be seeing, I guess a way of putting it is a kind of combustible event, a potentially explosive event that just happened. So watch what happens. Watch where the explosion goes carefully without stirring up panic. I would strongly suggest not talking about it too much beyond the kinds of things that I have discussed here. Not trying to frighten people. That's the last thing that needs to happen right now, is to frighten people. I mean, the conviction of a president, a former president, is frightening enough by itself. We do not need to add more fuel to the fire. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.